Deborah, it's so great to have you here on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's really a pleasure. You've given me an opportunity to find a new place on campus that I haven't been to before, so this is great.
Exactly. Well, you are coming to us from is it a podcast studio at Duke University somewhere?
Yes, one of the wonderful things about being in a university is that they have all kinds of extra resources. So there's a broadcast studio here.
Oh, tricks of the trade. What an amazing thing to have at your fingertips. Well, it's great to chat to you today. There's so much I want to unpack, particularly about the world and some of the incredible changes that we've been living through. Over the last 15 to 20 years, I've completely lost count of the amount of times I've heard the phrase that we are living through unprecedented times. Rapid developments in the internet and social media have created a global interconnectivity where political change is faster, more present, and more divisive than ever. Although we think of this as recent, we've seen it as far back as the Iranian Green Movement on Twitter in 2009, the Arab Spring on Facebook in 2011. But this political change isn't just large-scale and national, it can also be small-scale and local. Over the last 5 decades, you've led some of America's most significant cultural institutions. Looking back across all of that, how has the relationship between arts organisations and their political context shifted during your career?
Well, I started my career where I grew up, which was Southern California. And if you talk to any Angelino, even if they're short-termers, but especially if they're long-term Angelinos, they will tell you that the center of the universe is actually Los Angeles, and everything revolves around Los Angeles. And I like to tell that story because having lived there for a long time and had my first 2 positions in Los Angeles, by the time I moved away, it was a shock to discover that there is a lot and wonderful activity that's taking place around the world. I will say that in the very, very early times in Los Angeles, we had just a fantastic relationship with the mayor, the county supervisor, the state. It was a time of real belief in the role of culture and arts. And while we still had to do all the defending of the role of the arts, it was a different era politically. There was much greater knowledge, awareness, participation, involvement. One of the county supervisors who was so involved played the cello. So it was not something where you felt like you had to make the case. I have in every city been really closely aligned with city and county and to some degree state leadership. And that's ultimately because our organizations, our institutions play such pivotal roles inside community. And whether or not you are in Seattle and you are a part of the heartthrob, of the heartbeat of a city, and ultimately central to the redefinition of downtown Seattle, or the same for Chicago, being right there, a part of the identity of that bold city, or going to the nation's capital. There was always an involvement. There were always policy conversations, but it was never about defending the very reason that the institution existed. In each city, I will also say we had really strong networks amongst the leaders of the cultural institutions. And I think that helps a lot, not just with your patrons, but with the political leaders. Coming to DC is a different issue altogether. The Kennedy Center is the cultural center of the United States. And as such, really has the mandate to represent the world to the United States and the United States to the world, and to reflect all of our country and all of the interests and the cultural point of view of our country on the stages in Washington. We were a place that was actively involved with the White House, the administration broadly, Congress, all of the networks across the country. Each of the cabinet members were involved. It was deeply politically active with a small p. We were never taking a position or anything of that sort. This long story is really to say we are cultural institutions. We are vital to the identity and the health, the well-being, the economic strength of every city that you're in. Most importantly in Washington, D.C., I would say, but absolutely in every city that I have ever worked.
That's really fascinating to hear that there are so many similarities potentially with something as high profile and ingrained in the political world as the Kennedy Center, but also in smaller organizations or elements where it's cities that aren't necessarily tied to the national identity and psyche. Speaking of the Kennedy Center, it's such a special institution. It's both a performing arts center and a presidential memorial with federal funding attached. Although you've mentioned being involved with various elements of the US government, how did you frame or think about institutional independence from day one, and what learnings can you potentially share that might be of interest and have helped people running organizations regardless of what country they're based in?
Yeah. So when we are leaders of institutions, we're always longing to have a seat at the table where the important decisions of your community are being made. And that is true also when it's the National Cultural Center, and that you are eager to be able to say, have you thought about this point of view? Have you considered the role of an artist? Have you considered the way your culture is being impacted by the decisions or the policies? How can we positively support the work that's being taken? At the Kennedy Center, we had a unique board structure where it is appointed by the President of the United States. So you immediately have a voice into the White House because that leader appoints those individuals. So they have some relationship, one or the other, directly into the White House, which gives you a special kind of connection. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a hotline to the President of the United States, but it does mean that you are connected through Chief of Staff, First Lady's office, and always through the individuals who had a particular interest. And I will tell you that in my time of working with those individuals at the White House, it was the Obama, the first Trump, and the Biden administrations. We had really good, strong, open-ended conversations, strategic considerations, party planning as well, event planning, moments of glory to celebrate, that kind of conversation. All three White Houses that I was involved with, very respectful, very open dialogue, an understanding of the role that the Cultural Center plays for the White House, for the administration, and for the United States. And so I will say that it's a particular thrill, if I may, to acknowledge that the National Cultural Center, the home of opera, ballet, theater, dance, classical music, jazz, every art form possible, has a pathway into a conversation at the White House. And to have that kind of recognition and participation is vital, I believe, to recognizing the creative identity of our country.
I think it's really reassuring to hear about those good relationships that you had, because I think globally we tend to think that sometimes we're not valued as cultural organizations by our governments and our institutions as much as we can. And this sounds like a great scenario where actually that was the case. Over the last couple of years, the Kennedy Center has been going through a period of high-profile change as a result of political change. Out of curiosity, sort of that sort of level of challenge also requires learning skills, resilience, etc. Is there a sort of one single thing that an orchestra or cultural organization could do now to build political resistance before they need it so they can deal with some of these changing winds?
I think the most important advice I might offer is to stay the course of the work that you are doing. Artists have strong beliefs about their artistic creations. their way of expressing themselves through their art. And I think that at the core, we as Americans, and if I may, we who are alive in this time, need to stand by the basic value of freedom of expression. All art has a point of view in one way or another. It could just be pure joy and pure entertainment, pure fun. It could be recounting a story of sorrow. It can be offering a documentary of what it's like to grow up in a particular part of the world. But it always has a point of view. That is what humanity is about. That is who we are at the core, is we are storytellers. And I believe that artists and arts organizations need to continue to support that storytelling at its core. I think it's unfortunate that there has become a nature in this country in particular, but we see so much of it around the world, of a polarization that I like what I like and therefore I don't like what you like, which is not true. I mean, if I don't even know what you like, how can I say I don't like it? If you haven't sampled what I like, how can you say you don't like what I like? So the arts are one of the best ways to build empathy and understanding, but we have to have the open heart to be willing to share, exchange, and learn from one another. The arts are absolutely the best way to do that. And it's really important for everyone who feels they can, and everybody who has that power to stand up and say, freedom of expression, let's see and learn and understand through the arts. There's no better way to learn about other cultures other than through the arts. And when I say arts, I mean all arts. Food, fashion, literature, certainly popular culture. Those are all creative arts. That is the best way for us to understand other people. And that's how the world has gotten to know one another. That's why the United States is as beautiful and colorful as it is. It's because of the sharing of our culture with one another. And that has to be raised up and advocated more and more.
That's so true. And I think we started this talk by saying sort of we're of this global interconnectivity. And although we have that, it also sometimes feels that at times we are more separate in our small groups than we've ever been before. So actually having these opportunities to learn and connect in a way that is a community, because that's what communities are. They're a mixture of people of different backgrounds, experiences, views, etc., rather than being isolated little hubs, which is certainly a challenge.
Exactly.
Definitely. So sort of continuing with that idea of community, you mentioned earlier with your experience in Seattle and Los Angeles, this idea of being at the center of your community and politics with a small p. Many orchestras and festivals, community organizations, they sit at this sort of intersection of culture and national identity with varying degrees of prominence within their local communities. How do you help an organization that both understand and own that power when sometimes we can be afraid to do so?
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important for organizations of all size, but certainly the ones that have a position of prominence in a community, to be particularly open, welcoming, and offering an invitation for participation. And what I have learned over time is that you cannot impose your point of view on others, but you can open the door and offer an invitation to engage. And the places that I have seen this work the best is when we, whatever that organization might be, goes to a community, not just inviting in, but goes to the community and talks about what their needs are, what their interests are, and where the intersection of engagement can be. One of the projects that I'm most proud of at the Kennedy Center was one where we started by saying, we aren't just the National Cultural Center. We also need to be a role model for what it means to be a local performing arts center. And, just the physical size and the stature and the history of the Kennedy Center is imposing. It can feel intimidating for anybody to walk in, let alone a young person or somebody who has a supposition that they aren't welcome there. So in the last number of years, last about 5-6 years at the center, we launched through our social impact program an invitation to smaller grassroots cultural organizations in our community. And we invited them to come together. There were about a dozen of them. And we actually invested in them. We gave them space for rehearsals and performances and whatever it is that they do. And I'll tell you a little bit about the groups that we identified. And then offered an opportunity to curate programming. So we lifted them up, saw them like, I see you. You are an important part of our community. And I invite you to be planning what will happen on this stage. So I'm giving you a position of prominence that you might have thought only was going to those individuals and organizations of the highest recognition and caliber, as identified by some other power, of course. And by doing that and doing it for a couple of years with each of that cohorts, doing it over time meant that we built authentic relationships and that it changed how the community thought about us. So there was a transformation in that place over there across the river, or that place over there that those other people go to a place that says, that's my community center. That is where I have a home. And therefore, not only the members of those organizations, but the larger community saw and understood, appreciated it, and therefore felt and understood that the Kennedy Center was their home too. So what a lot of people in the outside looking at the Kennedy Center, oh, fancy place, big building, gorgeous setting, all those fancy celebrities, biggest names in theater, dance, music, opera, etc., was also, very importantly, the place where local kids, local community members knew that they had a stage, a place, and felt comfortable coming to engage in cultural activities. And I say that because that is not something that the Kennedy Center alone had the ability to do. It's actually having an open heart and a generosity of spirit that invites engagement. And so anybody who said, oh, well, I'm not really the right organization in my community, I don't believe that. Everybody can do this. And even if you are an organization with a particular specialty, say you're a dance company, there are so many different ways in which a dance company or a dance festival can engage in local community and really change the way people in your region think about you and your organization. That is not just powerful for attendance or giving, it is also powerful for the really deep-seated value that I think is important, that every single person needs and deserves to have access and engagement in arts activities, either participating directly or by watching, being invited to a performance of some sort. And if we can raise the level of understanding of the importance of culture and the arts in our daily lives, we don't need people like Timothée Chalamet saying the kinds of things that they're saying, because it's just not true.
Definitely. There's so much that I love about that, this idea of going to people from a sort of a pragmatic and practical level. How would you begin those relationships? Because I imagine in some cases, some of the people that you would want to connect with and collaborate with might not want to collaborate back, or might, again, think you're this unusual organization over the river that they wouldn't be interested in. What advice can you give for starting that sort of dialogue, or even finding the right people to speak to?
Well, I'll use a little bit of how we did it there, and then I'm going to talk about what we are doing here at Duke as well, because my team here have done this so beautifully. It's really impressive. In Washington, given the size of the staff and the number of resident artists, actually that social impact team put out a query to the entire staff. Didn't matter if you were in finance or HR or legal or marketing, or you were on the orchestra staff or the dance team. Everybody was invited to respond to a question. And that question was, if you were going to start a new cultural community, with whom in Washington, D.C. region would you want to do that? And it meant that there was a really interesting dialogue, especially amongst the staff who don't get to be in the programming world, who said, well, I'm in this dance group, or I'm in this karaoke club, or I'm in this design club, or I participate in this orchestra or dance group. And by pulling all of those names together, we were able to curate a series over time of really interesting organizations. And it also helped us reimagine what qualifies as cultural. So we absolutely had food and fashion. We absolutely had a youth string playing ensemble, and we had a running club participating in it, a book club. So it really encourages you to understand that the arts doesn't mean some extraordinary virtuosic performer or artist, visual artist of some sort, but that art and culture comes in all forms, that it is around us all the time. And that was probably the most powerful message to my staff, as well as the artists at the Kennedy Center. Now, in Durham, North Carolina, here we have this large institution called Duke University in a really fascinating town that is very arts forward, very engaged, and has always been so. My team has done a really beautiful job of establishing a series of programs where we do them all in partnership. And those partnerships, in some cases, are curated arts organizations. In some cases, it's individual artists. And it's a wide variety of types of cultural organizations. And so, again, we're basically saying here, this is a concert series. We'd like to do this concert series in partnership with you. And you will identify the artists. We will work with your artists and do all that it takes to present that concert. Or we will say, you have a fantastic venue that you are trying to diversify who attends performances and what kind of performances are there. Let's co-curate programs that we take from campus and put into your venue. And this has all been about lifting up the cultural resources of our local community. It's been really beautiful in my 6 months that I've been here.
Fantastic. It must be amazing to see that within such a short period of time, but also see the legacy of what you're coming into in this scenario as well. Not to put you on the spot too much if you've only been there for 6 months, but I'm really fascinated in this sort of ever-changing world that we have, and also how we prepare musicians and people in the arts for this and how they can be nimble going forwards. What do you see as some of the challenges that people in the arts, musicians, artists, etc., will be facing going forwards, and how are you helping them prepare for this going forwards?
I think the reason I chose to be in a place like this, which is not a conservatory level arts or institution, we're training, yes, we have majors in music, art history, visual studies, documentary studies, dance, theater. But most importantly, I came here because I was really interested in the students who are uh, have diverse interests and who are really interested in exploring the full spectrum of what it's like to be a human being and to sample new experiences and actually maybe explore a part of themselves that they haven't felt comfortable being able to express because they've been so focused on that physics test or getting into Duke or someplace like Duke. I mean, to get into any college today is a challenge, right? And especially to come to a place where you have personal and family expectations of how you'll spend your time potentially. What's really exciting to see here is how so many, a majority of students are spending time involved in activity beyond their sole major. And when I say that, I mean the young person who comes in as a physics major but loves dancing and continues to dance within our dance department, and about 2 years in realizes that they could actually be a double major in physics and dance, and that they become really interested in exploring the intersections in the way in which movement, body movement, and the physics of how people move and space, and create projects that bring the two together. So my larger goal for myself and my work right now is really about finding the intersections of where society can actually understand themselves and the world better by deploying this other superpower, which is their personal creativity, and giving students the opportunity to find their way, whatever that might be. I've been here only 6 months, and I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of somebody who said, well, I was an economics major, but then I took a class in theater and realized I was much more fulfilled and happier over here in theater. So I'm using all of the skills that I know I'm really good at and helping us think about how to advance the business model of theater companies. And that, the recent grad who is a film documentary producer who was a mechanical engineer while she was here at Duke. That's what the world needs, is we need more people who have an important career aspiration, whatever that might be, but they have both of the sides of their brain working really, really well. And to know that we can encourage creativity and an artful life in all of our students, but then also for our staff and our faculty as well. So it's about helping to find a way to support the development of the complete individual who comes out of a university experience and finds their professional career, wherever that might be, impacted by all that they studied here at Duke.
That's fascinating. Just to show a little bit about my background, my journey was from starting off on a history degree and then realizing I wanted to make the change into doing music at music college. Also because I found that essays were hard and it was much easier to play cello for me. But the connections I made with my contemporaries in different degrees and things, and that sort of mixing was something that you don't quite get at a conservatoire, which is, as you say, a real positive for interconnectivity.
Yeah, that's exactly why I like being here, because you're talking to students who today are taking a literature class, tomorrow taking a music theory class, but they're also still studying, quantum physics or whatever that might be. Since I didn't study that, I don't know. But it is fascinating, and I can see the brain cells that are exploding, and we're creating empathetic, curious, brilliant leaders for our future society. And, I'm at Duke. I'm very fortunate to be here, but I do believe that this is the kind of approach that can be taken across the country. You don't have to be just at a private institution. One of the special things that we do have here is that at Duke, if you're studying math, but you do still want to take dance lessons or drawing lessons or introduction to documentary, studies, you can do that. There's no barrier to entry. So I'm here, I'm a math major, I see this course, it fits in exactly at the same time, I'm going to go take that course. You sign up, you're in. There's no sort of, oh, well, let me see your portfolio. Do you qualify? So there is room for everybody to have that kind of experience. And that is a special ingredient. I think the other piece is leading with curiosity. And so this would be the other piece of advice, which is to encourage a depth of curiosity that is, of course, within your field, whatever that is, but also in those other parts of your heart and your mind, and perhaps your desire to study or experience something else, is to don't stop because you don't think you'll ever be any good. Move forward, do it.
Definitely. I just want to go back to something you said about arts leadership and this sort of intersection with other parts of the world. In some industries, it's very clear where to go for leadership training or being trained to be in administrative roles, whereas in the arts, it isn't quite as linear a journey to get there, and there aren't the go-to places for supporting young arts executives with the skills they need, potentially. What would you give as a potential advice for helping these leaders, one with this intersection with the rest of the world, but also potentially leading an institution in an increasingly politicized environment?
Yeah. Well, whenever I meet interns, I say, okay, don't forget, this is a way of life. This is not a job. There is no job today that is only 9 to 5 in any case, but this is not a job. This is a way of life. And you have to commit to that and understand that. That means you have to be passionate about the work that you're doing. And if you're only in it halfway, or you're only in it because you think that there's some visibility or upward mobility, or you like to hang around with celebrities, those are the wrong motivations. You do it because you're passionate and you believe in the art. And then, most importantly, you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to be prepared to be humble about what you know and what you don't know, prepared to invest the time to really get the training that's necessary. I, immediately after graduating college, knew that I needed more business acumen, and I went to business school. It wasn't arts administration school, it was business school. And, I graduated a long time from business school even, and I still remember specific things that I learned at that time. But more importantly, I learned how to learn. And I think being a lifelong learner is really critically important. I would also say that while there are programs, and I would say leadership seminars over, 2 days, 2 weeks, multiple years are valuable, but you have to also make them your own. You can't adopt somebody else's philosophy and live it if it's contradictory to who you are at the core of who you are. You need to be able to learn and then modify according to your own basic values and way of life. Yo-Yo Ma and I were part of an effort when we were working together in the Chicago Symphony that tried to build an initiative called Citizen Musician, it was at the time. And it was about the concept of giving back through your talent to help make the world a better place. And we had beautiful role models from, centuries to speak to this and then to model that behavior. And of course, Yo-Yo is a model of that. What's interesting is that over time, and as I came to the Kennedy Center, it really was about citizen artistry, not just musicians. We were in Chicago, so call it a citizen musician. But it was the idea that everyone can give back through their extraordinary talent and make the world a better place. I would say as arts leaders, it's important to be a citizen artist, to have the humility to understand what you're good at, to figure out what you need to get the additional training on, to find your mentors, to find those individuals that you believe are the right kind of role models for that leadership, and engage deeply in that way. Absolutely. In fact, in the process of moving here, I discovered that I have multiple bookshelves on leadership skills. I didn't keep all of them, but I kept most of them, just because they're resources. And as I look at them, there are also moments of inspiration to say, let's remember about what it means to be a servant leader. That we are here in service of the art and the artist, not for self-congratulation. And that is the most rewarding part of being in these complicated jobs, right? Is that you're here in service of the artist and the art form. If you remember that fundamentally, remember that you support it with humility and that you continue to learn not just about the art form, but about society and about people and what they need and what it takes to be a leader, that will be your path to good leadership. But it is about first acknowledging that you're not the smartest person in the room and you're not the only person in the room. You're one of a collective. And by taking leadership approach in that way, you're more likely to have success. And you're more likely not to be alone in that.
What fantastic advice. Well, before finishing up, I just have two sort of rapid fire questions to throw at you before we go. So speaking of the future, if you could change one thing in the industry, what would it be and why?
Does it have to be current or could it be past?
Oh,
Well, here's the thing, is that I grew up in public schools in California. And I remember when we did have art and music in the school day, and I remember the moment that it started disappearing. And I believe that that decision, that singular decision to start cutting it out and either putting it at the end of the day or not there at all, and ultimately unresourced at all, is one that has changed a lot of society. As I said, and I think we all who are listening and watching agree, art builds empathy, it builds understanding, it draws on creativity, it draws on different kinds of intelligence. And so many of the problems that we have in our world go right back to education and opportunities that all parts of society have at having a larger education and opportunities to identify and understand who they are. Let's just call it that. Arts are the best way to do that. How many stories, countless stories that we know of that says, this theater teacher saved my life. That music teacher rescued me. I found my voice in this musical theater opportunity. And it was really when the broadest opportunities for arts education were canceled. There's still many schools that do have really good opportunities, but they're not everywhere. And the issues that we have with kids staying in school, kids being successful in school, graduating, going on and doing other things, has everything to do with, do they want to be in school? And if you are in the jazz band or you're in the gospel choir or you're in the spring play, you go to school. And not everybody's going to be a football player. Not everybody's going to play soccer or volleyball or whatever those sports are, or debate team or robotics or whatever those are. But a lot more have the opportunity and the interest to be involved in the arts. So I believe the foundational thing that we should change, and it's harder today than it would have been back decades ago, is around education, quality education, and inclusion of arts education. Each individual institution and leader can't do it themselves, but they can fight broadly in their community and with others. So that's the most important. But I think that understanding that the world changes. The world is changing exponentially fast. And we know that, as you described at the very beginning, there was this slow change and there were changes. We all can imagine and think about what those changes are. And now it's just changing at a stratospheric pace. We can't keep up with it. If we try to hold on to our art form as though it only exists the way, drop the pin, I don't know, wherever you might think it would be, your organization will struggle. You will have a diminishing return on who your audience is, who your artists are, and what they're interested in. You need to be contemporary in the way you think about the presentation of the art, whatever that is, whichever the art. Now, I realize we're mostly talking to classical musicians, but I really push artists of all sorts, but especially musicians who can find themselves loving the way and the music that they fell in love with and their instrument, whatever that instrument might be. You've got to understand that the world has changed, and you've got to think about distribution. You've got to think about how people attend. You've got to think about what you put on the stage, how you put it on the stage, what it looks like, what it feels like, how long it should be. You cannot just say, well, it used to be that it was always like this. Well, nothing is like that anymore. Nothing is like that, quote, that anymore. So you've got to understand that you cannot presume that your symphony orchestra season will remain exactly the same. You've got to imagine how your art form fits into the constantly changing environment that we have today. I fear that that some of the artists who've been around longer are the ones who may be the least willing to change because they remember the heyday of another era. But the young artists who are coming through our conservatories really do understand their lives are different. They are experiencing their community, their society, their entertainment differently as well. And I think it's important as arts leaders that we are constantly evaluating and reevaluating how we fit into it while preserving the extraordinary work that we know and love and deserves to be heard. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have a Beethoven cycle. I'm just suggesting that maybe there's another way of thinking about how it's presented.
Definitely. There's so much potential opportunity going forward, which, speaking of, as a final question, what gives you hope for the future of classical music and the arts?
Ultimately, a shared live experience is extraordinary. And there's nothing that can replace that. I think that young people have gotten very used to living inside their device, but even they are going to a club or finding friends and experiencing something live, going to a concert. There is nothing like going to see a comedian and being in the room with 50, 500, 1,000 other people and laughing as a group. Yes, you can see the same comedian and you're even closer to him or her if you're looking at a screen. But you don't laugh anywhere near the same way as you're laughing when you're in a room with other people. If you are going to a concert, the energy that's coming off the stage, you feel because you're in the room. And if you're an audiophile, great, you're listening to it for a different reason. You're not listening to it for the very fundamental physical experience of being in the room with other people. So that will never change. As long as we can build beautiful spaces, that we can provide the right settings, there will always be an interest in having those shared experiences. Otherwise, why do we bother going to restaurants? Why do we bother going to the park? Why do we bother marching in a parade? It's the sheer joy of being with other people. And that's fundamental to the human experience. And what we need to do is continue to give people a good reason to be all having that shared experience.